Welcome to Last Week On, the podcast where we take our favorite TV shows, movies, books, video games, everything at this point, and we go back through them. My name is Adam Straughan, and joining me on this journey through The Last of Us, as always, is the one and only Mr. Joey Dean. How are you doing, Joey?
Hello, doing great. How are you, Adam?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. We were like chatting prior to this, and everything was just a bit of a whirlwind with technology issues and everything like that. But it's what happens when you podcast, right? You have good days, you have bad days. But yeah, keeping well. Still loving The Last of Us, and this episode in particular for me is one that stands out from the season so far. Like, there's so much in this in terms of like themes and metaphor, a lot of payoffs in this episode, but also just like that ending, that ending. I mean, wow. What's your kind of overall thoughts going in, Joey?
I thought that this episode was one of the strongest. Totally agree. And the fact that it was the first experience we have with a episode arc. Each episode was its own thing leading up until episodes 4 and 5. So to see this 2 hour in length story unfold and culminate in the way that it did, I thought it was really dynamic. I like how this episode began a little differently from the rest with excessive violence, something we do experience in the game. And I like that it ended on the typical, somber The Last of Us note, but it explored a lot of the archetypes that are within The Last of Us, the character development, the world building, the danger and fear, survival, the good guys versus the bad guys. What does that even mean? I thought it definitely captured the essence of The Last of Us. So I very much enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree. Like, there's so much this feels like it sits so well within the video game and it lifts so much out. And you can tell like the sections in this episode, which literally were in the video game, it's literally like gameplay like that in places, but as well, it really does lean in more into these themes that we discussed in the last episode and like in previous episodes as well, but really kind of opens them up a lot more. We have more of that exploration of what it means to be a hero again, which is really interesting what we're talking about in the last episode, and it'll kind of signal post them as we go through the specific moments that lean into that. But as well, like there's this kind of essence of, again, a little bit of like about innocence as well, like what it means to like lose your innocence and what you become, but also linked to that is humanity and what happens when you lose your humanity and how you see other people as a loss of humanity, which I think is really interesting. And that kind of brings us into the opening where, as you said, this is 10 days before where we are now. Everything's in wreck and ruin, as you said. We've got lots of violence. This is the revolution, right? So we're in Kansas City. The people have then taken back Kansas City, like the QZ from Fedra. And then, we see mobs in the street, they're chanting freedom, they're chanting like, fuck you, Fedra. We see like executions where they're literally like, they're beating Fedra members on the street, they're beating collaborators, they're hanging people, they're setting things on fire. And it's really interesting, like when we look into this in terms of revolution, where it is that sense of, if people are treated a certain way for so long and there's an uprising, then it can happen where they jump back and do the same to you. And it's almost like, they're no longer human. You see these people dragging these people through the streets and beating them and like, doing these horrific things to them. And that is almost like a loss of humanity. And it's interesting because, we see people infected by the cordyceps virus. They're losing their humanity by being infected by something else. And yet the infection here is human in that, it's like a rage that they're infected by. And we see that as well in the Kathleen character, where she's lost a lot of her humanity as well, because she's so kind of pent up with rage and wants revenge, right? So I think this opening really does reflect that.
Absolutely. So last episode, we talked about a bit of what you were just saying, and that some of the themes explored were heroism, the death of innocence. And I feel like this opening introduces two major themes that are explored throughout this 2 episode arc, but are, I think, planting seeds for the conclusion of this season, as well as future seasons. And those themes I would note are good versus bad.
Yeah.
What defines a good person versus a bad person? What actions define a good person versus a bad person? And also how that plays with the concept of revenge and a revenge mission and how when we lose someone who is or feels like family, how we ourselves can teeter on that line between good and bad.
Mm.
And so there's this reputation of the Kansas City Fedra that is painted in that they are bad, they rape, they pillage, they murder, and it's definitely dystopian. But we are introduced in episode 5 to what it looks like when Fedra isn't present, and it looks the same. They're
Mm.
doing the same thing. They're torturing. Of course, there's revenge paired with it. Of course, there's retribution. But I wrote down, is this liberation? Because now
Mm.
we have the character of Kathleen, who is supposed to be the representation of the revolution. And she's supposed to embody good. But when we first meet her, she's placating a role. She's becoming that which she destroyed or wanted to overtake. So again, we're challenged as viewers throughout this type of world, throughout these two episodes, but specifically right now, with the idea of what defines good behavior versus bad behavior, what defines moral versus immoral, and it goes back to that idea of making choices. We make
Yeah.
choices, sometimes they're simply choices, and we have to just move forward to survive. And I think this opening really pulls focus to those ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And to build a little bit on what you said there, like the situation that you were in at the time of making those choices. So, like, Kathleen, in a lot of ways, like Joel, is still wrapped up in trauma. Like Joel lost his daughter, Kathleen lost her brother, and that's her reflection on this world right now, where she just sees revenge as the only option. And that's that's all she wants. And we see that kind of, literally where if you overlook other kind of problems in the society that we're in right now, something will burst up and come to the surface, which is literally the metaphor that we get later on.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting that there's a parallel there with Joel in a way that there's a shared trauma, but there's a difference in the way that Joel is kind of overcoming that by having this other figure come into his life. But we see the polar opposite of that, where Kathleen doesn't have that. She's just so kind of enveloped in this rage and like that want of revenge for her brother that it's a completely different kind of choice and direction that she's gone on from Joel, which is really interesting. It's like a nice way to parallel looking at trauma, but just how it can affect somebody and the direction they take as a result of something that's happened to them, which I think is really interesting. But yeah, then we get our first introduction to Henry and Sam. So obviously they're hiding. They kind of see this happening outside. Henry says to Sam, like, kind of moves in, like, through sign language, says, like, look at me, focus on me. Very similar to Joel as well, kind of protecting his daughter, like in the kind of very first episode when he's running with Sarah, and he says, look, just look at me, keep your eyes on me, don't look at anything else. And again, it's like that's parental figure, right? Where, looking after a younger person, we kind of see that all the way through these little kind of mirroring moments of that. But I just have to say, like, Henry and Sam, casting wise, brilliant. Like, brilliant. And the choice as well, different from the video game, to have Sam as a deaf character, which obviously he wasn't deaf in the video game. What's your thoughts on the casting and that choice, Joey?
I really enjoyed it. I
Mm.
thought that when you're playing a video game, your interaction with everything, your relationship with story is different.
Mm.
And so you run the risk of, even in video games, sometimes the actions themselves can feel monotonous. When
Mm.
adapting that to the screen, I imagine the creators would not want to create that monotony. And I do feel like throughout this entire series, every character we meet is a snapshot into Joel's dynamic with someone. Bill and
Mm.
Frank reflected, mirrored Tess and Joel. And we see here that Kathleen and her brother Michael, as well as Henry and Sam, and these familial relationships also mirror both Joel and that which he's lost with Sarah, and also that which he protects with Ellie. And
Mm.
so I think if Henry and Sam were to not offer this nuanced lens into character development, it would feel monotonous potentially. There would be a little too much of the same. I
Mm.
think silence in post apocalyptic worlds is fascinating. So that itself is really gripping for me. And also the the exploration of a whole third dimension
Hmm.
and having to embody characterization in a different way than dialogue can. I think it challenges both the viewer to perceive and the actor to capture in a different way than we've seen before. And I think any opportunity to look through a different scope into this world is is an opportunity I'm willing to take because I want to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just works. As you say, like it presents another level of potential danger as well for Sam. You know, like he's kind of, as you said, exploring this post-apocalyptic world without that necessary like sense of sound, right? Obviously, of course, he'll feel vibrations and be able to see everything like that, of course, but it's another level of which, Henry has to look out for his brother for. And, it kind of ties nicely into, say, episode 2 as well, where sound was so important, where the sound needed to basically go in order to be safe. And yet in this episode, we kind of feel like when that sound's gone, it's an extra level of potential danger as well. It's like really interesting that we play back into sound like this all the time. But because of that as well, they have this extra level of communication with each other, which is incredible. Like if they were in a situation with clickers, they can communicate with each other straight away through sign language and kind of navigate that situation slightly better compared to the way that Joel, Ellie, and Tess were in that situation, literally mouthing, and a breath is what gave it away. So I love that they didn't bring any acknowledgement to it. It was just there immediately. And it differs from, as you said, differs from the video game that wasn't there. But I liked it. It was a different, fresh dynamic. And again, it was just endearing, just showed really the close relationship between these two brothers. And I really love that it brought that relationship together as well.
I'm pretty fascinated always by real life stories in the apocalypse because like one
Mm,
thing I always think about is what happens when someone's glasses break,
right.
right? Like what happens when somebody can't see, like where do they go, like so do they just all die off? Is that how this works? And so to see a real life situation, because that is something to consider,
Yeah.
how would somebody who's deaf be able to navigate this world? Because that is the human condition. There are deaf people. This is Earth. And so I think it's interesting and it challenges the viewer to think outside the scope of what traditionally is kind of a perfect scenario, if you will, in the apocalypse. And this is more of a realistic scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's totally right. It is bringing that extra level of realism to this, and the fact that we've got Joel who can't hear properly out of one ear, and like all of these little like things that kind of build up and make it more real. And it is answering these questions. What would you do if you have prescription glasses and they break? How do you see? How do you navigate around that? Do you go to Vision Express or something like that and try and find
My
glasses where
biggest
there's
fear.
can you imagine like
My
clickers running
biggest
around in
fear.
there? Like honestly, these are the things that need to be addressed. I love that we're doing it. Yeah. So then from there, we then go to Kathleen, right? So then she has these traitors, the collaborators, and they're all locked up. And she's basically still asking for Henry. So, right. So we're still back at this. This is her drive. She wants to know where Henry is, and the way that she questions them, it's like they're so insignificant to her. They're below, like they're just, dirt on her boot. And almost like it's almost in a way that a mother's talking to a child, like when she's like, "Did it feel good betraying your neighbors to Fedra? Like, did it make you feel better and safe? Well, how's that feel now?" And just it's berating them, it's belittling them, and all of this again is just it's for the sake of finding out where Henry is. That's her focus, and then again, when she stands up and like none of them say anything, she's like, I guess they don't know anything, kill them. Like she's ruthless, and like that humanity with she doesn't see them as human anymore. And like because she has this revenge set so much on Henry, who she's built up to be a monster in her mind, not even a person, is a monster, that these collaborators are basically the same. They're no longer human. And then it's just so interesting that we get that. And, this nicely juxtaposes a later scene that we get with Kathleen as well when she's in the bedroom, when we finally see that one kind of humanity side of Kathleen. But it's so interesting, she says the line, Kansas City is free. And that goes back to your question, Joey. Like, is this a liberation? Like how is the sense of freedom within that space? It's really interesting, especially when it's almost kind of led in the way that, as you said, Federer was leading it, but now led by the revolutionists. And how much freedom is there? It's just a really interesting scene, this.
It's almost begging the question of what exactly did you not like about Fedra, because you are immediately jumping into the exact same actions. I really like the writing and the dialogue in this part. I find it to be a bit satirical. And I think if
Mm,
we look at Kathleen's lines throughout this episode, they are very important and they're very foreshadowy. And particularly later on, she has something that I want to bring up, and it's, I think, very important. And the first time watching, I was like, oh, didn't pick up on that when I got through it the second time. But here she says, I'm not Fedra. No one has to die. You're all guilty. So that's how that'll go.
mm,
She is being totalitarian. She
yeah.
is creating dystopia. She's exclusively focused on revenge, and she is not interested in making the world a better place. And what is that? Is that good? Is that bad? Is she right? Is she wrong? Did she save people? Is she creating more problems? She does have this motherly way of speaking, and it does remind me of later in the episode when they're in that underground classroom bunker, and how it's almost like she's speaking to a classroom of children.
Mm,
And there's that pulls me back to this ebb and flow of innocence and childhood and adulthood, and what do all these things mean in the apocalypse. And I think that her way of speaking there that you brought up was very intentional to plant
mm.
that seed again and again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting as well as this scene goes on, she's questioned by Puri. Well, obviously one of them spills, the details about Henry and says, look, this is this is as much as I know. And then she's questioned by her kind of lead mercenary, as it were, Puri. And then he's like, oh, we're going to put them on, for trial. And she's like, not really. There's not really going to be a trial. Like when you're done, just burn the bodies. It's faster. And that line just sinks with you. If you don't know who Kathleen is up until that point, by that line alone, you now know who she is, what her MO is, how much she doesn't give a shit about these people. It's all about Henry. And that humanity in her is really, really gone. And again, we saw that kind of, we saw bits of that in the previous episode when she's talking to the doctor, like puts the gun to his head and he's humanizing the situation. He's saying, I delivered you. Like, I remember you as a baby. I held you in my arms. There's no effect to her. It's really interesting that this kind of builds up with these moments and these lines of dialogue that we get from her, which are so deadly, but yet such great character development for her, for someone that we get for 2 episodes. It's really well done. Yeah, then we go back to Henry and Sam. So they're kind of moving out, they're kind of moving through buildings. They obviously bump into the doctor who we saw from the last episode, and then they go up into the hiding place. Now, they're going through the remaining supplies. They're saying like, right, this is how much we've got. This is how much time we'll be able to spend in this hiding place with the supplies that we've got. We get the first mention of the tunnels, which is interesting. So like him and the doctor kind of mentioned about going through the tunnels to escape and the potential danger that's there as well. So that's the very first kind of mention that we get of that, which is explored obviously more later on in the episode. I like this, that Henry reassures Sam that they're safe. He says, we're safe here. And obviously brings up that question of where is safe? We get so many of these pockets of little moments of like, it's one of the overall themes, where we see these different spaces and we have to ask ourselves, are they safe there? And if so, how long for? Especially when, we get the scene with Kathleen in her old bedroom. We get the scene when they're in the tunnels in that little kind of looks like a children's play area for some time. They're safe temporarily. Even walking in the street right at the very end, there's nobody there. For now, they're safe on a temporary basis. I thought that was really interesting, especially when, Henry then gives the crayons to Sam and says, look, decorate the place. This is harping back to themes of, the episode with Bill and Frank. Frank wants to decorate this place where Bill has made himself safe. He wants to decorate it and make it feel more alive, make it feel more homely, make it feel more like a home, like a safe space. And it's nice that, we see again, like they're both starting to draw. And this is kind of the start of the overall theme of like superheroes with Sam as well.
My favorite aspect, which comes back later in that underground classroom bunker, are the walls and
Mm,
how they're painted, how they're
yeah.
drawn on. I really like this idea, and this is something I brought up a few times now, but the idea of life forcing its way into empty, dull spaces,
Yeah.
and how this is a representation of life. It's a representation of story. It almost reminded me of caveman drawings, if you will, and how people, when they didn't have anything, they would tell stories by just creating pictures on the walls to create their own narratives. And for Sam, his narrative is that there's a superhero in this story, and
Mm,
he wants a superhero. He wants someone to come save him, or he
mm,
wants to be that. And the idea of being a hero makes the difference. It makes the apocalypse a little more tolerable. And so we have Henry comforting Sam, and that's Henry showing up as Sam's superhero.
yeah.
And then we have Henry painting the mask onto Sam, which is Sam showing up as his own superhero. In
Mm,
last episode, we spoke of Joel's perception of Tommy wanting to be a hero. And we see at the end of this episode Ellie's desire to be a hero, the subconscious belief that she can save people. She believes she can. And as we have explored now in real time with later episodes, in moments in which she could not save people, now that she potentially has something that could cure, or so the fireflies believe that they could, she her blood can cure, or something in her can cure this apocalypse. Ellie is beginning to become that belief.
mm,
And I think there is this hero tale. But that was really my favorite part of this. I thought it was so sweet, and also how it's juxtaposed with Henry's really honest approach to parenting Sam
yeah.
for his safety, and just saying this is how the world is. This kid's going through a lot, and nothing is being sugar coated. I mean, he's being told that the doctor is most likely dead. They're running out of food, and stakes are high. And the only thing that's going to help Sam feel safe is by Henry showing up as that hero and saying, I'm not scared. We're good.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's a lovely moment between them as well when he asks, like when the doctor isn't coming back and he says to Henry, did they kill him? And Henry kind of just like says yes, it's just being honest with him. And then like rather than the reaction is a hug, I love that, just arms up and just reaches out for his brother and just needs that physical kind of reassurance in that moment. And it's just a beautifully played moment. And I love that Henry's response is that, but also, as you said, drawing the mask, getting that paint, the orange paint, and like puts it over his brother's like eyes. It's like kind of like a superhero eye mask, right? And I love that. Again, it's a sense of innocence as well, but also it's like he's there to mask the dangers of the world, from Sam. And he's literally painting a mask on him as well. It's giving him that superhero kind of fantasy in a way, like we can be heroes, we can get through this. I will help you through this world. And I just love the metaphor of that. And, we'll get to this moment as well later on when they go downstairs and, well, let's do it now. They go downstairs and they have to move on. They're out of his supplies. Obviously, Sam's really hungry, probably Henry is as well. And then, Henry kind of like steps up and looks through the glass. And again, we have the sign, the orange sign, the reflection goes over Henry's eyes as well. I text you about that straight away, Joe, because I missed that the first time I watched it. And I thought that was beautifully done. The cinematography there, it just, he is the hero as well
Mhm.
without wearing the mask. I just thought that was brilliantly done, so subtle. But again, this is a show that lends itself to details, and you watch out for these little details because everything is purposeful. Everything has a meaning like that. And that shot was beautifully done.
Yeah, I think that the position of Henry as a hero also challenges our perception of good and bad,
Mm,
because Henry explores and confesses later on that he did a bad thing, but he did a bad thing for the betterment of Sam. And so
mm,
is it a bad thing? And
yeah.
this episode, if we choose to lean into it, really challenges us to ask, one, what would we do in the apocalypse? And two, what defines that moral code? What makes someone good or bad? And I think it's pretty innate we perceive Henry as good, but Henry is battling himself, and he
Mm,
doesn't perceive himself as good because of that action. And so we then are thinking that as well, is, did Henry do the right thing by giving up Michael, who is painted as this really great person? I mean, he is kind of also a hero
mm,
in this world. And Kathleen steps in as the antagonist, but she definitely creates rebellion, but she is more of an antagonistic character. But Michael wasn't. And Henry isn't, theoretically. But then there's the challenge of Kathleen achieving more than Michael. And so, can a hero even exist in this world?
Mm.
Can somebody pure and good survive? Can their actions actually take us the long haul? And Henry, as being positioned as a hero in that imagery,
Mm.
especially to Sam, we wonder, can his moral code make it?
Yeah, absolutely. You took the words out of my mouth at points there, Joey, where like last episode I kind of brought up, like posing ourselves with these questions, what would you do in this situation? And that's so important because, we are in a different world now where we have to look at a different moral code. The moral code of the old world isn't applicable for this world now. Things are so different that the decisions that you make and the situation you were in as a result of that are completely different. And it is asking that question all the time. What is the good decision? What is the heroic thing to do? And we get moments of that we recognize throughout this. But again, it's always those tough questions. And the effect that it has on the characters and where they've come from to make those decisions are the really interesting parts of this show. And I just find that fascinating. It's really, really an interesting thing, a really interesting theme throughout the entire show. We get that in the very end of the game as well. Is that the right decision? And it's a really fascinating question that I'm sure we'll come back to all the way throughout the remaining episodes, right? Obviously, Henry sees Joel and Ellie kind of crash through the laundromat and, sees them, the big shootout there. So we kind of see like what we saw in the last episode, but from Henry's perspective. And then we get, them crawl up. They find where they were sleeping that night. Obviously, they're avoiding the glass on the floor. Interesting that, we get a scene where Henry hands Sam a gun and is showing him how to hold this gun. Again, kind of similar themes to when Joel was showing Ellie how to hold a gun. That was a loaded gun. This is not a loaded gun. So again, it's like almost like that, the parental figure teaching a child how to use a gun. So like a nice kind of reference point within the two episodes there. And then we kind of cut back to where we were up to at the end of the last episode when Ellie's shouting Joel to wake up. Then Ellie's got Henry behind her with a gun, and then Sam's obviously standing over Joel. And I love this, just the clumsiness of it when he's like, I don't know what the next step is. He's just being honest straight away. He's like, I've never done this before. And like, when Joel's talking, he's like, he has a weird tone. And like Ellie's like, no, he always sounds like that, like type thing. And he just doesn't adjust his tone at all. And he's like, can I trust you? And straight away, like, he's so open to that trust because he hasn't had anyone to trust for a long time. He had the doctor, but the doctor's been gone for so long now. He doesn't know what that situation is. And that's really the only person. And the fact that he's seen somebody like being kind of counteractive to what's happening with the people within that city, that's his first question. Can I trust you? Can we kind of talk to one another here? Is everything okay? Because realistically, I need to know that right now. And then again, we get that where they introduce themselves, they're in a similar position, they're sharing food. Like Ellie like kind of notices that Sam's a kid, and straight away she's got a connection there with another child that she hasn't seen in so long. And it was just an interesting dynamic there straight away, this sense of trust that we haven't seen in a long time in the show.
Clumsy is a really good word. I think it was very clumsy. And I think that is indicative of Henry's moral compass.
Mm,
And as a mirror to Joel, but also a bit of a contrast to Joel. Joel, as we'll talk a little bit more about in a few episodes, but has been explored so far, is a character who is between good and bad. And we're
mm,
figuring out how we see Joel, but his instincts are the right ones. The way that he shells up, he gets very serious. He is ready to make a move at any second.
yeah.
And Henry, contrarily, the one with the quote unquote correct moral compass, is he's gonna, if this wasn't Joel and Ellie, he'd have gotten himself killed
Oh,
because
yeah.
he admits, I don't know what I'm doing. He immediately puts his gun down. We're gonna have to trust him. And this comes back later on when they finally get out of the city and he's talking to Sam and they're like, why can't we use our flashlights? And then they run out when the guy is shooting at them. There's
Yes.
all of this naivety that's paired with Henry's actions that come from someone with that innate goodness. And Joel, who doesn't have that same type of goodness, he's more willing to do bad things. There's definitely a contrast in their behavior, and I like that they planted that here.
Yeah, absolutely. And as well, like, he's a lot younger than Joel. Like, he was obviously, I don't know, he's like a teenager, right? So potentially like a product of the world as well. Like that naivety's there. And he clearly hasn't been through the same shit in what Joel's been through. Joel knows danger, like can literally sense danger before it happens. Whereas his kind of mission is just to get out of the city any way means possible. And as soon as he's out of there, you see that dynamic in him shift. Oh, we're out there, we're free, everything's great now. As you said, flashlights, let's go, let's talk loudly because we're fine. And Joel's kind of experience from that always comes first. We are not fine. We are never fine. We have to keep going. It's an interesting dynamic there. But yeah, they have the conversation. He says like they're talking in this like kind of boardroom. So he says, "Look, we're not Federer," and he says, "No, like worse, I'm a collaborator." Joel straight away says, "I don't help rats," which is really interesting. That Kathleen mentions that later on as well, like when she refers to them as rats again, dehumanizing these people, rats that live underground. That's where they belong. It's just that interesting language that's associated there. But then Joel knows that term. He knows collaborators straight away. He doesn't need that explanation because he's had dealings. He's seen this before. Really, really interesting. And then, Henry opens up about his predicament. He says, like, we're not violent. I just want the best for Sam. And then I love when he looks over, and Ellie and Sam are just sitting there, like, kind of playing together and just laughing. He says, that's something I haven't heard in such a long time. And that's like, again, it's that innocence has been lost. That's what he's referring to that I haven't seen innocence like that in such a long, long time. And it was just a beautiful moment that both Henry, but also Joel just look over and see it for a second. And that kind of comes back, like kind of is littered through little moments in this episode as well. Obviously, when they're underground as well later on. And it was just a beautiful moment when they kind of just look and think, wow, that's something that we haven't had to appreciate for such a long time. We obviously get the introduction to Kathleen when he kind of talks about her. So, like, he introduces Joel to Kathleen in a sense. This is from the video game, right? Like, drawing out the map says, like, look, this is where we are. We need to go from here. We'll go through the tunnels here. We'll pop up here, through the residential section, over the bridge, and then we're out. Everything's fine. And again, this backwards and forwards of where, like, Joel's like, well, this all sounds fantastic, but why do you need me? And he's like, oh, well, there's no infected in the city. Have you noticed that? They've all been pushed underground. And he's like, but somebody from Fedra told me they're no longer there. And Joel's like, so what, you need me to be a bodyguard, basically. And it's a nice backwards and forwards, but, eventually they agree. And it's interesting because that theme I kind of spoke about last time, Joel believes in people. He doesn't believe in causes. And I think Joel has that innate ability to look at people and know whether to trust them or not. And that resurfaces quite throughout the show as well.
I really enjoyed Joel's quick note saying, I don't know exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of about Kansas City Fedra and how there's almost this reputation that Kansas City is as bad, the Fedra was as bad, and Henry affirms that, and he says, "Yep, the rumors are true," but it almost expresses this connective tissue between the world. In the beginning, we talked about Atlanta QZ, even though we're in Boston, and now they're getting information of Kansas City QZ. So they know bits about the world. So there is information, but it's rumored. Also, this is the first time, I believe it's the first time that the term clicker is used in the show. And
Yeah.
Henry says, you two ran into a clicker and survived. And it's obviously something that we speak about in the game often, so we know what they're called. But for those who aren't familiar and they're simply watching this as a television show, this is their first relationship with that term, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah, there's something also about this tunnels situation. I zoned out for like a second because I was really trying to pinpoint. And I know the Bill and Frank episode, there was this emphasis on the underground. And now I said last time, the last episode, I felt like there was some contrast between attics and underground and some contrast. And I'm kind of feeling this tunnel imagery as not just an agent in the game that will get you to go underground and experience darkness. It's more immersive when you're playing the game. You have to use your flashlight. It makes it scarier when you're playing the game to go underground. But in a television context, there's the opportunity for that still. But everyone thinks these tunnels are filled with infected, but they're not. But then we learn later on that there actually is infected underground. And so it's this almost metaphor connection to Kathleen and her role and how all of these people think everything's been excavated, everything's out in the open, they're in the clear, they're safe, they're protected, when in reality Kathleen's the one that's going to get everyone into trouble.
Mm.
But at least at this moment we get the information that it's a potential escape route for Henry, Sam, Joel, and Ellie. And they travel to the entrance of the tunnels in a glass building. My favorite part here is that Joel is out of breath when he
Yeah.
when he runs. The direction of Joel is really spot on. They're really classifying Joel as an older person, and there's just
Yeah.
a lot of things with the loss of his hearing and him being winded walking upstairs and now being winded when running that comes up later on about his relationship with the ability to take care of someone and how he's getting older and he's not as survivable, if you will. But they go underground and Henry immediately celebrates, which is very indicative of
Hmm.
Henry's character and the naivety there and how he's like, look, my plan worked. But actually, Joel's like, no, 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 wait. And
Hmm.
so there's this, and that keeps happening. They enter this space with a castle painted in front of a door. They talk about that there were rumors of communities underground who escaped, and Sam rushes to go to the door. He gets so excited, and Joel immediately stops him and says, "No." Again, Joel is this voice of reason in
Yeah.
this dynamic of these two, Henry and Sam, who are really naive and they don't quite get the world. They don't understand what is at stake, even walking into a room blindly. How Henry doesn't stop Sam, but Joel stops Sam. Very
Mm.
indicative of how Henry is perceiving this world and his relationship with this world, and ultimately will be Henry and Sam's undoing. At some point in time, it would be their undoing. But they
Yeah.
go in this room, and it is a former classroom, essentially, for children. A lot of paintings on the walls of trees, butterflies, people. There's a soccer goal painted on the wall for
Mm.
kids to play soccer. And we get this really nice zoom in on a backstory in the game that's pieced together of the character Ish and the picture which says Danny and Ish, our protectors.
Mm.
Again, this idea of heroes within this story. And they decide to spend some time there, and we get a little more of a conversation between Joel and Henry about Henry's backstory.
Yeah. So then obviously, I love the moments as well when, Ellie and Sam, I think in these moments, like when they're going over the comic books, again, like in the game, the comic books are something that you can collect like all the way through the game.
Yes.
And it's really nice that we get obviously the title of the episode as well. When, she says, to the edge of the universe and back, endure and survive. And Sam obviously teaches her how to say that with sign language as well. And it comes back to this theme straight away of like kids seeing heroes in comic books, like, and their heroes are in the room with them right now. Like Joel is this like hero in a sense to Ellie, and like Henry is a hero to Sam, and they're in this sense of safety. And it was a beautiful played moment there where like their innocence and their love of this, exploring those heroes are right there with them in the room. And I just thought that was really wonderfully done. But then yeah, like as you say, like there's the emphasis on we can stay here, we'll be safe for a while, we might as well stay and then pop up in the cover of dark, and that'll be an easy way for us to get out. Obviously, Henry explains everything to Joel of why Kathleen's after him, right? And again, it is this sense of Joel even apologizes to him early and he says, look, I called you a rat earlier on. I don't know you. I don't know your circumstance. I apologize. That probably wasn't best of me. And then even when Henry starts to explain it and he says, like, I'm not really a great person. I didn't make a good choice. This is what I had to do. And straight away, you think that it's something, as you're watching the episode, you think it must be something linked to like, protecting Sam, like potentially maybe because he's deaf or something like that. And then you get the line about leukemia and things change. The dynamic in that conversation switches immediately, where he's like, look, I needed this medication, the medication that worked. Obviously, there wasn't a lot left. I needed to give Fedra something that would give me the rest of that medication to keep Sam alive. The only thing I could give them was Kathleen's brother, right? The leader of the resistance. And again, it's asking that question, what would you do? Right? Like, what would you do in this situation if it's your brother? You're in this post apocalyptic world. You can't take him to a doctor. For any other treatment, you are thinking on your feet. And the repercussions of that decision are massive in this episode. But yeah, just he says, like, I'm a bad guy because I did a bad guy thing. but yet, in a sense, to his brother, he did the heroic thing because he saved his life. It's an interesting question, interesting dynamic that we keep coming back to, and I love this exploration. I love when it poses that question, asking you literally, what would you do?
I love that Henry says that he killed a man. And
Mm,
then later on, Kathleen explains that Michael was in prison, in Fedra prison. He told her not to have a revenge mission and to forgive Henry. So even though Henry was a reason that Michael died, he didn't kill Michael, but
mhm.
he carries the weight of this so much that he believes that he killed someone.
Yeah,
But he says I lied, and he didn't lie originally. He didn't kill anyone. He did rat someone out, but he didn't actually kill anyone. I thought that was really interesting
mm,
and definitely brings us to the end of the episode with some foreshadowing there. Ellie says, what happened to them? The children and the people down in the bunker. And Joel says maybe they didn't follow the rules and they all got infected, which
mm,
obviously is funny, but also brings us to the end of the episode. There's a few rules that Joel gave Ellie, and he essentially says bad things will happen if you don't follow these rules. One of those rules is to show anyone your scar. And Ellie breaks that rule at the end of that episode, end of this episode, and we'll talk a little bit about what happens after that. And
yeah,
one thing that we haven't explored too much, but we've talked about briefly, is Ellie's fascination with fantasy, but also her fascination with space. And I bring this up because there's probably going to be a really lovely moment in a future season that space is going to be important. And I just really like how the comic book is Savage Starlight. Aside from Mortal Kombat being a game and fun, there most of the references have been very outer spacey that Ellie has liked. And even when earlier episodes, when she talks about the airplane and how Joel got to go out in the sky, Ellie really is fascinated with this. And I like that the name of the episode is obviously this through line that's in the game, this motif, endure and survive, but is quoted from the space fantasy sci-fi comic book that she's obsessed with.
mm. And I love that moment. I know exactly what you're talking about in the second video game. Is just, oh, one of those moments again where, for those that haven't played, there is no combat in that whole section. It is just a story beat between Joel and Ellie, and it's just fantastic. It's really incredible. And it does pay off a lot of things that are set up in this first season and in the first game as well. It's beautifully done. Yeah, nice catch there, Joey. Actually, that's fantastic. And then, yeah, we kind of, from here, we then go to Kathleen in her old bedroom. Now, this scene is really important for that Kathleen character, but also for the overarching kind of message within this episode and the series, to be fair. She's in there, she's in her old bedroom, the bedroom that she shared with Michael. There's bunk beds in there. Like there's pictures of like old posters that they had on the wall as kids that are now torn away, and just, we have the brick walls that are just behind them there. But also, this is like, as kids, we grew up with our bedrooms. Those were our protection, right? Those were our like areas of solace, like where we could go away from the worries of the world. That's where we would go. That was your safety from the world. And she talks about this when she tells the story of when there was like, this big thunderstorm outside. And Michael said, look, like, as long as we're in here in our perfect box, we are safe. And again, it's exploring that sense of safe where, these spaces that were once a sanctuary for us, that were safety, are no longer that. That world has gone. These were areas that we were safe for such a long time. We'd go to, we'd like kind of release ourselves to the world, come back here and feel safe. And that's kind of gone. And that's a nice reflection of no matter how much you put over the walls of like posters of things that you love, your personality, when you take those down, it's still those walls that are behind that. It's just that reference of the real world is still out there that you're going to go out into. And the
Mm.
way she talks about Michael as well is beautiful here. When she says, he was beautiful, I'm not. He would be horrified at the things that I've done because her humanity is gone. That beauty of that humanity and that human spirit that obviously Michael had in rounding the people together, leading the people through like, liberation in quotation marks. She even says Michael would ask me he asked me to forgive Henry, but I can't because where is the justice? And that's such an interesting character beat for her, how different she is from her brother, who in his last dying moments was still hanging on to that glimpse of humanity and saying, look, we're people, forgive him. He made a decision to help his brother. but she can't. That humanity in her has gone. She just wants revenge.
There's a bit of innocence attached to that moral code and
Mm,
moral compass. And I think the exploration of innocence in these two episodes and how innocence can't necessarily survive in this world. And that is a bit of these safe centers, these boxes that made us feel protected and safe. That imagery really communicates that underground bunker that the classroom is in. It's a box that is protecting these children from scary things on the outside, loud thunder and scary monsters, if you will. And I think this is even more connected in a literal sense when one of the close-ups we see is a photo of someone playing soccer, which is
mm,
exactly what Ellie and Sam are doing in that underground classroom and what the children who were safe and protected in there were able to do for enjoyment and fun, but they didn't survive. That that world didn't survive because innocence cannot thrive. And Kathleen's brother Michael might have been innocent. And maybe that challenges us to think whether or not Henry is bad. But regardless, Michael's actions could not take them to sovereignty. They couldn't find a way out with that innocence because innocence cannot survive in this world. So although Kathleen, like Joel, is doing bad things, also like Henry, how he did a bad thing for Sam, that's how they survive. That's how they get things done.
mm,
I also think there's something to be said about Kathleen pulling the curtain back and showing the innocence within her that's still deep down,
mm,
and how we're all just children in these boxes, if you will, in these structures. And I feel like it's a communication of every character in this story that they've kind of walled up these inner children within themselves and these
mm,
outer shells that keep them protected. And how we've seen Joel throughout this let that shell down a little bit, crack open a little bit, and how that's actually getting him in trouble in some regard. But there are just these little bits of ourselves of the old world and of innocence and of childhood that we want to keep deep down. And Kathleen wants to keep that. And the fact that doesn't have that anymore, and Michael is driving her revenge mission.
A lot of the characters in this whole series had those walls around them. You know, as you said with Joel, like came straight to mind for me as well, where the scene when Ellie and him are laughing about the puns, you know, like in the last episode as well. He's having that moment of when he can have that almost childish laugh again, that childish innocence of let's just laugh at a pun and forget about the world for 10 seconds. But then we see the repercussions of that if you continue living a life of doing that, where it can then lead into danger. Those walls have to come back up because you have to be ready. You know, we go back to episode 3 when Joel even says to Bill, you know, that fence will last maybe a year. You have to be ready because people will keep coming. It's all about restoring those physical and kind of emotional barriers to prepare yourself because something is going to come that will knock you down. Again, then we then cut back to Henry, Sam, Joel, and Ellie. They've made it out of the tunnels now. They've popped up. They're in the residential areas, Henry said. And it's what you said, Joey, straight away, that he's like kind of gloating a little bit. He's like, look, my plan was good. It worked. Like, we put flashlights on? No, let's up. Joel's like, no, absolutely not. Kind of Joel straight away is like, we're not in the clear yet. You can even tell the way like they're walking with such a like relaxed kind of demeanor, whereas Joel's the one in front who's like on edge, like looking everywhere, scanning to make sure that things are safe. You know, and then Ellie talks about that they're going to Wyoming, and like Joel looks back at her and she's like, what? It doesn't matter. Like her trust is fully in them at this point. She's like, look, you know, potentially they could come with us. And then this conversation, Ellie's allowed to be a teenager again for a brief moment. Those walls are coming down, and then we get reminded gunfire. You know, from a sniper, they all get down. Those walls are straight back up, and that's a perfect example of that right there, where you know Joel's the one who's been very stoic, very on edge, very kind of looking at every single possibility, whereas these younger people are just, hey, we're out, we're free, everything's fine. You know, we can just let our guard down. Oh no, you can't. And that one gunshot, that's just a reminder of you can never let your guard down in this world for too long. All of this is from the video game, right? This is literally the video game where, you know, Joel says to them, look, stay here. I'm going to go around. He says the guy's a shit shot. We see again like the naivety of Henry where he grabs Sam, he tries to run away. The guy shoots near him, he then pulls him back and gets back down. And then Joel's like, look, stay here. I'm going to go and find him. So then Joel goes round. He goes up, he finds the old man in the tower. Again, interestingly, the man himself is in a box within this tower. He's boxed on the control of Kathleen. That's his kind of mission. That's his livelihood. That's the box that he sat himself in, which is a really interesting metaphor again. And I love that Joel gives him a chance. He says, like, please don't just, put the gun down. Please don't do this. And the man as well just turns to try and shoot Joel. Obviously, Joel takes him out. And that's when we get the introduction of, and then this is when the tension of the episode goes from like where it was to 100 million. When Joel hears on the radio Kathleen's voice saying, have you got them? Have you got them? If you got them pinned down, we're on our way. We are close. And I loved all this. For me, this is just yes, 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 yes. I loved all of this. Where Joel straight away picks up that sniper rifle. He like shouting to them, look, run, run. And then we get, as you said in the last episode, Joey, we see the vehicle with the word run on there. These vehicles, that word is not for to help people. This is a sense of danger. Run because you're going to die. Like, I just loved all of this, like the run on the traffic, like Ellie, Henry, Sam, like they all start running. And then this is like perfectly from the video game. This is the moment one of the moments I was talking about. You could tell this is video game. You're playing as Joel. You've got the sniper rifle. You're shooting down to try and hit that driver. I love that Ellie's kind of running, pointing backwards, trying to fire her gun as well, trying to do almost kind of the heroic thing here. And then the very last second, Joel gets that shot where he hits the driver. And obviously the truck goes over, piles into the house, and then sets on fire, which is really important for what happens later on.
It definitely was a big shift energetically, and I think those who like the series like this for action are definitely getting their payoff now.
Yeah.
I do think that people have a misperception with a lot of post-apocalyptic literature, whether that be in a book or on screen or in a video game. There's a lot of slow burn downtime, and especially in a show in which we are exploring deeply character development, which we don't get to do in the game as much, especially with characters like Kathleen, who would simply be the leader of the rebellion. She would be a character who'd be shouting orders in the distance. We would maybe get some interaction, but we would not see what cogs are turning in her mind like we can now. But yeah, people get a little uppity when there isn't enough action. And here they're getting their payoff because it goes from truly 0 to 100, and the stakes are high. We don't know what's going to happen. Henry, Sam, and Ellie are behind a car. Sam jumps out, and Kathleen has the gun pointed right at him, and we're just wondering, who's going to make it out of this situation.
Right. And like, I love all of the conversation here as well. A little bit of foreshadowing from Kathleen when she says, did you ever stop to think that maybe he was supposed to die? Well, kids die, Henry. It's foreshadowing there straight away with obviously the fate of Sam at the end of the episode, but also that innocence dies. That's also what she's saying there. Do you think that the world revolves around you? And that's an interesting line because right now, the world revolves around Kathleen. That Kansas City revolves around her and what she wants. And it's interesting that she's putting that onus on Henry. And I thought that was really, really interesting that kind of, she's so enveloped in that, pinning everything on Henry that she doesn't realize that herself is that's the narrative, what she's living. I thought that was really interesting.
That particular bit was what I was speaking about earlier. And although it is foreshadowing Sam, it is foreshadowing something that we're not going to see just yet. And I think this has a much greater impact of without giving so much away. I just think this is greater. Maybe he was supposed to die. Kids die all the time. Do you think that the world revolves around him, that he's worth everything? I don't think that's about Sam. It obviously does indicate what ends up happening. It is a bit of foreshadowing in that regard, but I think it's a larger theme of what happens, as she says, when you fuck with fate. And for those listening who don't know what any of that means, return to this episode at the when all is said and done here, and we'll have another conversation. And this really came forward for me when she said this, and correlating my instinct correlating this to something that we haven't witnessed yet. but also the idea of revenge
Hmm.
paired with that story, and how that story ends up becoming one of revenge, and
Hmm.
how revenge takes different faces on and from different people explored as a result of those actions, that when someone fucks with fate and does put someone before the worth of everything, it made me look back at these two episodes and realize Kathleen is a mirror for a lot of other characters that we have met and we haven't met, and that her revenge mission for someone she cares about is much deeper than exploring what's happening in Kansas City. It's way more
Absolutely.
than that. And this was when it all clicked for me. And I thought, oh, that's why they put this here. Now it makes
Yeah.
sense.
And that's beautiful foreshadowing for the second game, which, as you've hinted on there too, Joey, is a revenge game, but revenge in very from two very different characters for two different reasons.
Mm,
And, this is kind of dipping into that where you are seeing a lot of that in Kathleen and what that's done to her. And you are going to see that again in a huge way, which I'm really excited to see. But yeah, that's definitely foreshadowing for a lot of things, like that moment, we are kind of getting a little bit of that foreshadowing of Sam, but also, as you said, of what's to come for characters we are yet to meet and for the development of characters who we will meet later. She's about to kill Henry, and then the truck sinks down into the ground. I remember watching this and just being like, oh my God, like this moment, this was incredible. So, like, the truck goes down to the ground. We then hear the sound of the infected, and then this horde bursts out of the ground. And this for me was just like, it's what you said, Joey. If anyone has wanted some action up until this point, this is your episode, baby. This is where it's all at. Like, everything is happening here. So video game, like when Joel's like covering them with the gun, which is what you do in the video game. And like they're just trying to run. Like, Henry and Sam run off immediately. Ellie's trying to run as well. She's being covered by Joel, obviously, with a gun. She then jumps into the car. And then when that bloater emerges, I mean, can we just wow? Like the look of the bloater and like the danger of the bloater, they've captured that perfectly. And I love the moment of when like Perry, which is the name of like her, close mercenary, just looks and just knows. And he says, look, you go, like, I'll try and hold it off. You just run. Like, you are what is important right now. You go. And just that scene when he kind of, he's shooting at the bloater and the bloater just grabs him and tears his head off like a doll. Like, just wow. Like the ferocity of that creature is captured so, so well. And again, I love Joel's reaction. This acting from Pedro Pascal is amazing when he saw that happen through the scope of the rifle, and he has that moment when he takes a breath and he actually shakes, like of the thought of, oh my God, what am I going to do against that? And he just shakes before putting his eye back to the scope again. And I just thought that was epic. That just captured everything of fuck. Even someone like Joel, who, you have seen him being fearful, but not to the point of where he's been like stunned to the point of, oh my God, like I am trembling right now. And I thought that was really, really beautifully done.
yeah. And also, we've established a little bit up until this point that people don't encounter clickers often.
Mm-hmm.
So, what about a bloater? Who encounters a bloater? Has Joel
Right.
even seen this before? And it was discussed in episode 2 when Joel, Tess, and Ellie are walking outside across that bridge and they hear the sound of the infected. Ellie talks about the ones that are like bats, and she talks
Mm,
about the ones that sprout or send off sporic gas, if you will.
right.
Those are the bloaters. That's what she's referring to. In the game, when you shoot at a bloater or when you try to kill them, they do release a gaseous substance. So part of the difficulty of fighting a bloater is you have to be at a particular distance from them because that gas will hurt you. And so, yeah, how many people have actually encountered this? They're all stunned because this isn't something that they talk about often. I
Mm,
will say, from a technical standpoint, I didn't really like when the camera was forced slow-mo on Perry's face when he saw the bloater. I'm sure that that was a choice they did in post-production later on, but I don't think that they filmed in the frame rate of slow-mo and then they
right.
forced it to be slow-mo, and it felt very like 2005. Like it was giving very Law and Order SVU feels. And I was just like, I don't know. It like, even though I know why they did it and it did emphasize the bloater impact to an audience that might not know what a bloater is, it
Right.
was just, it kind of removed me from the cinematic quality of the show for a second, and it kind of
Hmm.
broke the fourth wall, and I was like, oh, I'm watching a TV show. Just for like a second. Because it just felt, I don't know, it didn't feel smooth. But I do understand why they did it. And can we talk
Hmm.
about Miss Bendy Bitch, the little girl who's
Miss.
just Miss Bendy Bitch, the girl who's flipping and twirling inside of that car. Um, First of all, so cool that they were able to find a contortionist who could do that, a young contortionist, but
Hmm.
also how interesting that they kind of sealed the story of innocence with actually seeing a young person, a child infected. I mean, maybe this child was in that bunker. And maybe that's the backstory, that classroom that's underneath, and how this innocence is what's chasing the main character, and also is what gets Kathleen. But
Mm.
it's that history, it's that backstory, it's that childhood, it's that which we cannot escape, that which is buried inside of us, that ends up being what kills Kathleen. I thought that was very smart. But I also just thought it was like such a serve that this little girl is a little pretzel, and but so terrifying.
You know what she reminded me of? Like, like the little girl that Sia uses in her music videos that dances for
Uh-huh.
her. Like, literally,
Yeah.
put a Sia wig on her, and it's the same person. Like, it's literally her.
Yes.
Like the way she was bending and moving was
Oh my
just
gosh. Uh-huh. It's giving
fantastic.
very
Like,
Reagan walking down the staircase.
my God,
Yeah,
yes.
Sia's definitely in that world. She's a little creepy.
Absolutely. Like Sia was there in the background controlling that child. She
Yeah.
like tell me differently. Um, I loved it. And again, it's everything you said, Joey. Like, and I, had this written down, innocence as well. That's what that child represents, that loss of innocence and how innocent can be the death of you. But again, it harkens back to that, well, kids die. And then we see this
Oh,
child who
well,
has died.
there they go, girl. Yep.
Yep,
You're gonna be
there they
heartless
are.
toward children, then no, they're gonna get you
Yep,
back.
exactly. You're gonna die. But the moment after this scene was my moment of the episode. This is what we've been building up to, right? Like everything here. Ellie, this whole exploration of being a hero, what it means to be a hero. She wants to save the world. This is her heroic moment. And I text you about this. I remember after the episode, I was like, Ellie's hero moment for me. I was like a little bit emotional, like watching, just because I thought, yes, this is what I loved. When she sees Sam and Henry, they're pinned under a car. There's obviously two clickers that like trying to reach under and get them. And this moment of when Ellie, for a second, she looks down the street and that's her getaway. She could run, but then she just no pulls out her little knife and off she goes. And this was epic. Oh, Joel's covering her, shooting the infected that's coming close to her. She's making her way across the street. She then gets across. I love it. She turns around for a second. There's three of them coming. This like lorry or van just wipes them out, and then she does not hesitate. She makes that decision straight away in this moment, gets her knife out, pulls it back, stabs it in the neck, and then goes to the other one, stabs it in the neck, and then grabs and just pulls them out and says, "Come on this way, follow me." That for me was so perfectly played up. The way that the music kind of swelled as she was doing it. But again, we've had this build up, and this is perfect payoff. And I love to see this in media when we've had this reference kind of through the episodes. Ellie talking about being a hero. What does it mean to be a hero? Can I be a hero? I want to save the world. And it harkens back to kind of that line from Spider-Man in a way, from Into the Spider-Verse. If you can just save one person, you focus on that. And that's Ellie's moment here. These two people who I've just met, who, I'm building a relationship with, they're innocent people to a degree. They're good people to a degree. I'm going to save them. I loved it. Like the second time I watched it, I was whooping, I was cheering. I was like, this is the moment. I loved it.
We learn more in episode 7, the backstory of Ellie, and
Mm-hmm.
how this is potentially a really traumatic moment for her, to see people she knows she's starting to care about be attacked.
Yeah.
And I think that it is definitely aligned with what we've perceived thus far, that Ellie wants to be a hero. She wants to correct her mistakes, or what she regrets deep down, things that she has lived over in her head over and over again. And she gets to step up and be that for two people that she's developing a fondness for. We also see her and Joel working together
Yeah.
for the first time in a different capacity, which is interesting and is something that we explore more in the game and will unfold a little bit more throughout the season as a lot of time is assumed, but Joel and Ellie become more of a team, of a unit.
Mm.
And there's also this innocence conversation again, because Ellie thinks she saves them. And it's this yippee celebration, but there's one thing we're learning, it's you can't celebrate too soon. And Ellie thinks she saves, but in reality, it ends up kind of being the opposite by the time the episode ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because she could
That's
have maybe saved one of them, but her actions sealed the deal on both.
mm. Yeah, that's something that I was going to bring up as well, where it's like a peak this where Ellie has, had her heroic moment, she saved them, she pulls them out. But there's also the breakdown of the idea of being a hero for Ellie, where her opinion and probably feelings on that change by the end of this episode. Her demeanor completely changes when obviously we're getting to it. But the very end, that's a different Ellie from what we had in this moment, where it's almost like the destruction of what's happened and like, was it even worth it? Like afterwards, is this the result of what I've tried to do? And like that idea of being that hero, everything will be fantastic, you're a hero, you've saved the day, is completely deconstructed for Ellie by the end of this episode. And I think it's fantastic how we have this build, we have this peak, and that almost crumbles down as well. And it's beautifully played. But again, it's that reminder, you can have these moments, but don't ever rely on that and think that that is your safe place. And that is now the status quo, because that will change like that. And that's exactly what we get. And yeah, I mean, obviously, as you said, Joey, we then get Kathleen chases after them. We then get little Sia, Dancy Girl, who then jumps on Kathleen, starts to like literally beat her up, and then starts to take a bite out of her. Again, foreshadowing, well, kids die. You're going to die by a kid. Beaten, starts to munch on her. We then see all of the infected then run off into Kansas City. We know that that city is now fucked. Like, there is no way. All of the mercenaries that they had kind of protecting that city were all there, basically. That city's gone. That city now belongs to the infected. It's their home now. And I just love that moment of when you see them all running off there just straight away into the city. So then, yeah, we then go to the motel, Joey, and what happens next?
Well, they think they find refuge.
Yeah.
Joel and Henry discuss working together, moving forward together. So
Yeah.
we as an audience think, oh, how lovely.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to join them. Joel says they're going to walk to Wyoming on foot. And then we segue to the bedroom, and Ellie and Sam are reading the comic book that they are bonding over, and they're kind of having their last hurrah of innocence together,
Right.
which is sweet and sad. Then they start communicating with Sam's board that he writes on. They start discussing the concept of fear. Are you ever afraid? Ellie says, I'm afraid all
Mm.
the time, which is a really nice pull back the curtain of Ellie and what she's experiencing, because she does come off really tough and
Yeah.
she does come off strong and much like a hero in some regards, especially for someone her age. But we learn Sam has been bitten, and she tries to save him. She thinks her blood is the cure. She cuts herself open. She rubs her blood on the bite. I don't
Mm.
know if she thought that's how it would work or if she was just trying to make him feel safe, but I do
Yeah.
believe she thought that's how it would work because she didn't say anything. I wouldn't know how to navigate that situation at that age, but maybe the outcome could have been different if she did say something.
Mm.
No matter how hard it would have been, Henry might not have had the guttural reaction that he did. And obviously, they wake up the next morning. Sam attacks her, and then you can take the rest because it's a little gross.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so yeah, I mean, before we get to that point as well, I just want to address like when Sam writes down on the pad, if you turn into a monster, is it still you inside? Now,
Mm,
that line in particular, let's go into it. Of course, he's referring to, the monsters that he's seen, the infected, like, do we lose ourselves? Like, are we completely gone once we're infected? But that line is all the way through this show. Like, is Kathleen, has she lost herself because she's now a monster? Like, has Joel lost himself? He's done some bad things. He could be, in some regards, classed as a monster. He's done some shit things. Like Henry did a potentially, to some people, really horrific thing. Is he a monster? And what level of humanity do we still have inside of ourselves when we do these bad things? We see Kathleen, like, the reaction to her is that, her humanity in many ways is gone. We do, of course, have that innocence that still resides in her to a degree. And we get that lovely scene in the bedroom, which explores that. But the way she sees people, the way she treats people, the way that she's governed by that revenge narrative now, a lot of that humanity is gone. And she even admits that. She says, Michael was beautiful. I'm not. Interesting language there, linking back to being a monster. And I just thought that was a fascinating line, which to put at this point in the episode as well, where we've got two children who have, the essence of innocence, talking about being a monster and the way that they see monsters. They look at superheroes battling monsters in space. They've seen this infected who are literal monsters that have no humanity in them anymore. And I thought that was really prevalent as a theme that is overarching for characters and the decisions that they do. Joel, not to spoil something, but right at the very end of the season, as we'll see, is Joel a monster for things that he does and a decision that he makes right at the end of this? And I thought that was a really interesting line to really place in there.
Well, it definitely, the idea of being yourself beneath brings me back to what Kathleen said about her brother making her feel safe inside those boxes, and
Right.
how for me that was communicative of the innocent self that's buried within the outer tough shell that keeps us safe and protected. Just as we're learning, there is more to Joel than where he was at when we flashed forward in episode 1, and he had an outer shell. Did he become a monster? Question mark. There was still Joel deep down, and we've been watching it unfold. This idea of monster definitely explored throughout this season, but and also without giving anything away, but briefly talking to the souls of us who have experienced The Last of Us 2. I think this idea is really explored through Abby's character.
Yes.
And aside from the fact that pretty much any character in The Last of Us 2 can be perceived as a monster, Abby's character is one that we meet as a monster, and we learn there's more deep down and there's a story behind it. And so I think this episode does set up a bunch of things to come. And this
Mm-hmm.
is, I think, the last moment of that.
Yeah. No, 100%. I just think these are, as you and I have said, Joey, like, there's so many moments throughout the show where a line or a moment or something happens. Hang on to those details because the payoff will come again. And not even just in this first season. Definitely the second season's already confirmed that it's going to happen. It's going to start filming, I think, soon. Hang on to these moments because there will be payoffs and, like, foreshadowing of these little things that we'll see come back in a bigger way or explored in a different way in another season, in another episode. But I think that line in particular was so prevalent. It's just brilliantly played. And then, we go to, as you said, this really sad, depressing moment when, Ellie wakes up. She then sees Sam sitting, facing away from her. She then goes to see if he's okay, to see if, she's managed to save him. He's obviously turned. They then burst into the room where, Henry and Joel are. And then Sam's on top of Ellie. She's trying to fight him off. And straight away, Joel's instinct is to shit, like, get a gun. Henry snatches it off, like, off the ground away from him. And there's that moment of hesitation. And then he just shoots, obviously, his own brother in the head. And, like, as we say, like, this episode, in terms of energy levels and everything, goes all over the place. The dynamic in here, we're at a real low, where it's so tense. Like, Jesus Christ, he's just shot his brother. And then, Joel knows what's going to happen here, I think. Like, the sense of Henry, like the look on his face, the shock, the tears coming down his face. He's like, what have I done? That's almost like that's his purpose gone now. That looking after his brother, like, what else does he stand for? Like Sam is gone. And then obviously turns the gun on himself and kills himself. And even Joel, like, is trying to say, no, like, no, Henry, don't. He's gone. And I love that the camera lingers on Bella Ramsey's face. I mean, the acting from Bella Ramsey is just amazing. the tears down, the way that even Ellie like jumps, like flinches and even go like lets out a guttural sound, just like a like oh my god, I can't believe I've just seen that. It was just beautifully played. So well done.
Up until this moment in the show, Bella Ramsey's reaction, I think for me, was the most moving split second that I've experienced. This whole scene, everyone was so strong
Mm,
as actors. It was so gut wrenching. It made it so much more impactful. But Bella Ramsey's reaction, that moan, the tears, what Ellie just witnesses is just the fact that Bella Ramsey was able to capture that so well. I mean, what a powerful young
oh
actor.
yeah, absolutely. It was just wonderfully done. And I think reaction is always, for me anyway, in horror movies, when we see somebody react to something that we can't see, it elevates that sense of horror and that sense of emotion. And we get that here, where we, of course, didn't see, Henry shoot himself, but we just need to see Ellie's reaction to understand the emotional impact of that moment. And it just plays off so beautifully. And then we come towards the end of the episode here. So they've buried them outside, and like, again, they're really kind of stoic. They're just very quiet. They're just reflecting on what's happened, basically. Like these last couple of days have been hell more than anything else. I like that Ellie wrote on the notepad, I'm sorry. That's her apologizing. She couldn't save him. I'm sorry for this happening. Puts the note down on like the notepad down on Sam's grave. And then Ellie straight away. Like this is what I meant about the deconstruction of feeling like a hero. That's gone in her now straight away. She's very cold, very direct, very Joel. Which way's west? Let's go. Like, let's just go. Like, I'm over this now. I tried to be a hero. I literally saved them at one point. I tried saving Sam with my blood, this thing that has been driving me for so long. My blood is the cure. I'm going to save the world. In my kind of version of that, I tried saving him when I cut my hand and he still died. I'm no longer a hero. And it is kind of that deconstruction of that thought in her mind. And her belief of that's died. Then let's go. And then they walk.
Last episode, you and I spoke about the reverse role of Joel and Ellie and how Joel is undoing that which he's learned during the apocalypse.
Mm,
And he's becoming softer. He's rediscovering his innocence. He's rediscovering those things deep down that existed when he was a father to Sarah. And Ellie is doing the opposite. She's becoming harder. She's becoming more shelled off. She's becoming more calloused by the
yeah.
world. And this is the real turning point.
Mm,
There will be future bigger turning points, but this is one of the turning points in which Ellie is that innocence is kind of sealed. And I think that Ellie's character will remain, but Ellie's not going to be soft like she was previously.
right.
And that setup is really going to influence the future of The Last of Us and Ellie's role in the show and how she kind of becomes this, I don't want to say warrior, but this really capable human in the apocalypse.
Absolutely. And again, like we start to see that softer side of Ellie disappear. Like even in the next episode when they go into the encampment and the way that Ellie's talking to like, Tommy's partner. And she's just very to the point, very kind of cutthroat as well. And this kind of softer, more I'll give you a chance side of Ellie is starting to go. And we see that in moments. And that's really interesting. And it is just the starts of this character arc that we see even going into the second game, that we see a very different Ellie, a much more kind of battle hardened like Ellie. And these are the little moments of that start with that. But yeah, like I just want to know, like Joey, overall, that's us covering episode 5, Endure and Survive of The Last of Us. And what are your overall thoughts and then your grade out of 10 for this episode?
I thought it was fabulous. I don't really see this as one episode. I do see this as two. 4 and 5
Yeah,
are they're kind of the same deal. I I thought it was next to episode 3. I thought it was the most moving.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was the most heartbreaking. And I find the dynamic quality of these last two episodes to be really profound examples of storytelling.
Mm,
The way that the writers, the directors, the everything, the whole team of The Last of Us was able to take us through this world, show us something brand new to what in comparison to what we've seen thus far, to take us through the minds of characters, the ones that we're familiar with, ones that we just meet for the first time, to fall in love and fall in hate with characters and have that all pull together with these themes that in the last moments conclude and are punctuated, and with all of these other motifs that are being set up for the future, these moments of foreshadowing, the intentional dialogue. I thought it was really fabulous.
yeah, I agree. It's like, for me, this episode does the best of everything that The Last of Us does. You know, like everything together in this episode. And again, as you said, like we said this, episodes, like the last episode, sorry, and then this episode for me tie together beautifully. Like 4 and 5, it's like part one, part two. But I think especially this episode, it just it has the best of everything. You know, we have all of the character stuff. We have the big kind of action set piece. We have those quieter moments. We have those themes and metaphors that they've been exploring all the way through the show. And it just really elevates that and brings it together without kind of forgetting what The Last of Us is, which is character driven. You know, this is a view of characters in this dystopian world and how it affects people, how we survive, what we need to do to keep going on. And I just loved it. For me, like this was a real high point of the season. Again, the emotion of this episode is you as the viewer, you're all over the place. You know, like how you feel kind of happy with this relationship that's built, and then absolutely, you know, ecstatic by this big kind of action-packed moment, this heroic moment from Ellie. And that's all completely destroyed and kind of, you know, the rug is swept out from under you again because this happens at the end. But what a perfect reminder of the thing that we've been saying all the way through this, which is never get too comfortable on something because that will change immediately. We loved Tess. We got so comfortable with Tess, gone. You know, like things will change all the time, and you just have to find a way to keep going on. And I think this episode really stood as an example of that and was brilliantly done.
I went back and forth in my mind with the rating. I landed on 9 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being that extra point that I gave episode 3 was because of its impact on me, and that I couldn't stop thinking about it, that
Mm-hmm.
I really felt like it captured something brilliant and moving. And although I think that technically, when it comes to filming and writing and storytelling, this was arguably perfect. It had all of the good stuff, down to little details that you won't pick up unless you're familiar with the game or familiar with the future of the show.
Mm.
But I didn't walk away from it feeling the same thing I felt on episode 3. And for that, I'm going to say 9 out of 10. But I mean, it was outstanding.
Yeah, I literally, Joe, we've been in sync. Like I had 9 out of 10 literally written on my pad as well. I think, you know, very similar to you. Like what I'm going to say here is pretty much what you've just said. It's like episode 3, I felt like I could linger in that for so much longer. You know, I could have had more time within that episode. Like if that bled over into 2 episodes, I would have been there for it. You know, like that time, like the way that we lingered with these two, like those two characters, and how beautifully well done that story was told. I could have stayed there. And then literally, as you said, it lingered with me as well for days after I was still thinking about that. And I think the reaction online and people talking about episode 3 has been the episode that has lingered with most people. And it was just beautifully done. And as you said, like this episode, technically it does everything great. You know, like it does, as I said, like the best of what The Last of Us does, really. We get those big action beats, we get those character beats, we get all those themes and metaphor and all of these things explored still. But then this is done, you know, chapter kind of closed. We're moving somewhere else now, and it feels right to move on from this. Whereas I still, for me, episode 3, I could have lingered within that just a little bit longer to really enjoy that space. But yeah, brilliantly done, brilliantly done. And yeah, I rest on 9 out of 10 as well. This show is just, it's fantastic. It's high quality. It's doing everything, you know, at such a high standard. Just another solid episode. But yeah, that is our coverage of The Last of Us episode 5, Endure and Survive. Another solid episode. And yeah, Joey, I thank you again for coming back and doing this with me. This has been incredible. I am loving this. Tell everybody where they can find you on socials.
You can find my personal socials at Joey Dean Official everywhere. And you can stream my band, King Vagabond's music, on Spotify, as well as follow us at The King Vagabond on all socials.
There you go. So go and check them out and give them a listen. Do it now. If you are listening to this, remember all of the podcast episodes are available on YouTube. So if you do want to watch them on there, they are on my YouTube channel. But again, if you are watching this and just want to listen, we are available on all podcast platforms. Just go and check us out. Type in Last Week on Podcast. You'll find us on there. Remember, we are on all socials as well. So if you do want to check us out on Instagram and Twitter, type in Last Week on Pod. You'll find us on there. If you do want to follow me, I am at Straughan87 on Twitter and on Instagram. So if you type that in, you'll see my face. Give me a follow if you want. So, Joey, I just want to say thank you again for coming back and covering this with me. This is incredible. I've loved this, and I am excited for the next episode.
Thank you, Adam, as always, for having me. I'm always excited to talk about this world, one that I have loved dearly for a decade. And yeah, the next few episodes will definitely be something to talk about.
Absolutely. I'm excited for it. All right, everyone. Until next time, take care.
Bye.